The LDS Church is a very historically minded organization. Its history is intertwined with its identity. As a result, the Church has been very good at rewriting its history in order to present a faith-promoting identity. A very good example of this was a recent address by LDS President Thomas Monson in General Conference, where he retold the story of Thomas B Marsh.
I believe most of us are familiar with the sad account of Thomas B Marsh and his wife Elizabeth. Brother Marsh was one of the first modern-day apostles called after the church was restored to the earth. He eventually became president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles.
The reason that the members of the church are familiar with this story is because it gets told and retold, not only in General Conference addresses, but also in the church manuals. Marsh is a favorite target of the church as an example of how people can fall away from the one true church due to their pride.
While the saints were in far west Missouri, Elizabeth Marsh, Thomas's wife, and her friend, Sister Harris, decided they would exchange milk in order to make more cheese than they otherwise could. Sister Harris was faithful to the agreement, but Sister Marsh, desiring to make some especially delicious cheese, saved a pint of strippings from each cow and sent Sister Harris the milk with no strippings. This caused the two women to quarrel.
This story is supposed to take place in Missouri in 1838, but as far as I can tell, it was first told by church leader George A. Smith in 1864, almost 30 years after Marsh left the church. There are no journal entries or church records about this milk strippings dispute. Unless I am missing some evidence to the contrary, it seems to me that George Smith invented this story.
When they could not settle their differences, the matter was referred to the home teachers to settle. They found Elizabeth Marsh guilty of failure to keep her agreement.
I find it interesting that Monson would mention that the home teachers got involved in this dispute. The home teaching program replaced the ward teaching program in the 1960s. The ward teaching program began in Utah in the early 20th century. It did not exist in Missouri in 1838. Home teachers do not have the authority to settle disputes within the church anyway, so this part of the story could not have happened. Monson is embellishing an already dubious story.
She and her husband were upset with the decision, and the matter was then referred to the bishop for a church trial. The bishop's court decided that the strippings were wrongfully saved, and Sister Marsh had violated her covenant with Sister Harris. Thomas Marsh appealed to the High Council, and the men comprising this council confirmed the bishop's decision. He then appealed to the First Presidency of the church. Joseph Smith and his counselors considered the case and upheld the decision of the High Council.
If this were the case, then there should be some kind of church documentation, or journal entries, letters, or something to attest to this series of church courts. However, there is nothing that I could find before George Smith's 1864 slanderous invention. Fortunately for us, Marsh did write a sworn affidavit as to why he left the church, and Monson knows this.
Elder Thomas B Marsh, who sided with his wife through all of this, became angrier with each successive decision. So angry, in fact, that he went before a magistrate and swore that the Mormons were hostile toward the state of Missouri.
According to the sworn statement that Monson is referring to, Marsh left the church due to the invasion, looting, and burning of Gentile settlements by members of the church. This included the Daviess County seat, Gallatin, Missouri. Marsh was not the only one who was bothered by this act of violence and larceny. The day after the burning of Gallatin, both he and Orson Hyde, who were both members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, left the church in protest. Monson is making it look like Marsh's affidavit was an attempt to get revenge against the church for their decisions against his wife. In reality, he was testifying of the violence the Mormons were inflicting upon their Gentile neighbors. Monson knows this. Regarding Marsh's actions, Joseph Smith remarked that Marsh had been lifted up in pride by his exaltation to office and the revelations of heaven concerning him, and now he has fallen, lied, and sworn falsely. While Joseph's statement does refer to Marsh's sworn statement, there are no references to milk strippings to be found. I do think that Marsh went a little too far in his affidavit when he stated that Joseph Smith intended to take control of the state of Missouri by force. Joseph did not have the manpower to do that, even if that was his intention. The threat from the Mormons was not as great as Marsh testified, and much of the violence was in response to the violence and injustice that had been inflicted upon the Mormon people.
His affidavit led to, or at least was a factor, in Governor Lilburn Boggs' cruel extermination order, which resulted in over 15,000 saints being driven from their homes, with all the terrible suffering and consequent death that followed. All of this occurred because of a disagreement over the exchange of milk and cream.
No, it didn't. This is one of the biggest problems with the leaders of the LDS Church. They are not interested at all in what really happened or where the truth lies. Instead, they continually whitewash and misrepresent history for their own benefit. In this case, it is done to play the martyr card and demonize apostates. Monson knows about Marsh's affidavit. He references it a couple of times in this talk. Therefore, he must know the real historical reasons why Marsh left the church. But he does not come close to mentioning that, because it does not support his agenda. Instead, he places all of the saints' suffering on Marsh's shoulders when he says,
all of this occurred because of a disagreement over the exchange of milk and cream.
This is reprehensible to me, and Monson should be ashamed of himself.
After 19 years of rancor and loss, Thomas B Marsh made his way to the Salt Lake Valley and asked Brigham Young for forgiveness.
Young did let Marsh rejoin the church in 1857. Members of the church consider this an act of great kindness and forgiveness. However, Young was less than kind towards Marsh when reintroducing him to the church. He told the audience, "Marsh has told you that he is an old man. Do you think that I am an old man? I could prove to this congregation that I am young, for I could find more girls who would choose me for a husband than can any of the young men. Brother Thomas considers himself very aged and infirm, and you can see that he is, brothers and sisters. What is the cause of it? He left the gospel of salvation." When Brother Thomas thought of returning to the church, the plurality of wives troubled him a good deal. But look at him. Do you think it need to? I do not, for I doubt whether he could get one wife. Why it should have troubled an infirm old man like him is not for me to say. After publicly humiliating Marsh, he was prevented from rejoining the Quorum of the 12 and died as a pauper in 1866. Today, the church uses the invented milk-stripping story of the Marshes to denigrate those who find fault with or leave the church. Far from forgiving them, the church has turned their life into a lie to be retold in Sunday school lessons, and has slandered the name of a man who dared to stand up against actions that he saw as wrong. If the church had any integrity, they would denounce this story and remove it from their literature. However, they will not do this, since it would be an admission of error, and they are more interested in saving face than doing the right thing.